The room went silent when Daniel Carter placed his final trade on the conference screen. It was worth only $350. In a room filled with executives who moved millions before breakfast, the number looked almost embarrassing. One of the company's senior executives actually laughed. The CEO leaned back in her chair, staring at the tiny position as if Daniel had just announced he was opening a lemonade stand on Wall Street. But nobody in that room knew what Daniel had sacrificed to make that $350. They didn't know about the unpaid bills hidden in his kitchen drawer. They didn't know about the little girl waiting for him at home, or the promise he had made to her after losing almost everything. And they certainly didn't know that the trade everyone was laughing at would soon become one of the most closely watched moves on Wall Street. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that someone's circumstances never define their true potential, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us never to underestimate another person. Daniel had never been the kind of man Wall Street noticed. He wore the same 2 suits to work, alternating them throughout the week. His shoes were polished every Sunday night because he couldn't afford to replace them whenever they looked worn. His lunch was usually something he had packed at 5 in the morning while preparing his daughter Emma for school. He wasn't ashamed of any of it, but he had learned that in certain rooms, people judged you before you even spoke. 3 years earlier, Daniel had worked for a small investment firm that collapsed after a series of reckless decisions by people far above him. He lost his job, his savings disappeared into medical and household expenses, and suddenly he was raising his 8-year-old daughter alone. His wife had passed away after a long illness, leaving Daniel with a child who still kept a photograph of her mother beside her bed. Daniel could have given up. Some days, he almost did. But every morning, Emma would walk into the kitchen with her school bag and ask him what they were going to conquer that day. So Daniel kept going. He eventually found work as a junior market analyst at a massive financial company. The salary was modest, but it was enough to keep food on the table and the lights on. His job was mostly research, spreadsheets, and risk reports. He rarely received credit, and he wasn't invited into important meetings unless someone needed numbers checked. Then came the quarterly strategy meeting. The company's CEO, Victoria Harrington, was famous for her aggressive investment style. She had built her reputation by making enormous trades that sometimes generated extraordinary profits. Her philosophy was simple: bigger opportunities required bigger risks. Daniel listened quietly as executives discussed a particular company that had been struggling for months. Most analysts believed the stock would continue falling. Victoria's team was preparing a large short position. But Daniel had noticed something buried inside the company's public reports. Its cash reserves were stronger than the market believed, its debt restructuring was nearly complete, and an overlooked contract was likely to change its earnings dramatically. Daniel spent several nights studying the numbers after Emma went to bed. He checked every assumption twice. He didn't trust his conclusion at first because it went against almost everyone around him. Finally, he took a small personal position. $350. That was all he could afford to risk. When his manager discovered the trade, Daniel was ordered to explain himself during the strategy meeting. He stood before the executives and calmly presented his research. He wasn't claiming certainty. He wasn't predicting a miracle. He was simply saying that the market might be wrong. Victoria looked at the screen and then at Daniel. She smiled. The room filled with quiet laughter. To them, $350 was meaningless. Victoria asked why someone who supposedly understood markets would risk such a tiny amount. Daniel simply explained that $350 was not meaningless to him. It represented money he had saved slowly, one small amount at a time. He couldn't afford to gamble with his daughter's future. The room became uncomfortable. Victoria dismissed the trade as insignificant and moved on. Daniel returned to his desk, expecting the matter to disappear. Instead, something unexpected happened. 2 days later, the company's analysts discovered that Daniel's research was correct. The overlooked contract was real. The restructuring was moving faster than expected. Within weeks, the stock began climbing. Then the financial news picked up the story. Major investors started buying. The stock rose again. And again. Daniel's tiny $350 position suddenly represented something much larger than money. It represented the fact that he had seen something everyone else had ignored. But Daniel still didn't celebrate. That evening, he went home, cooked dinner for Emma, helped her with homework, and listened as she described a science project she wanted to build. She didn't care about Wall Street. She cared about spending time with her father. Meanwhile, inside financial offices across the city, analysts were studying Daniel's research. Then the copying began. Investment firms started analyzing the same overlooked indicators. Several major funds entered the trade. Market commentators began asking who had discovered the opportunity first. Eventually, Daniel's name appeared in an internal report that circulated among some of the most powerful investors in the country. Victoria read it in silence. The man she had laughed at was now being studied by people managing billions. But the most important moment came a few days later. Victoria found Daniel alone in the office late at night. He was finishing a report while preparing to leave early enough to get home before Emma went to bed. For the first time, Victoria didn't see an inexperienced employee. She saw a father who had lost almost everything and still refused to stop learning. She saw someone who understood that risk wasn't measured only in dollars. Sometimes risk meant knowing what you could afford to lose and having the courage to protect what mattered most. Victoria apologized. Not publicly. Not for publicity. Privately. Daniel accepted the apology, but he didn't forget the lesson. His career changed after that. He was promoted into a research leadership position and eventually became known for a different approach to investing, one based not on ego, enormous bets, or chasing headlines, but on patience, evidence, and disciplined thinking. And years later, when people asked him about the famous $350 trade, Daniel never talked about the money. He talked about Emma. He said that when you have someone depending on you, you learn that courage isn't always making the biggest move in the room. Sometimes courage is making the careful move when everyone else is laughing. The trade had made him successful. But his daughter had made him strong. And that $350 became a reminder that value isn't always measured by the size of what you risk. Sometimes the smallest decision, made with the greatest conviction, can change everything. Before we end, comment, $350 changed everything, if you believe that someone's beginning should never determine their ending. And if Daniel's story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a second chance, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the very person who has been quietly preparing for their moment all along.